a lot of action. But before we do that, I'd really like to get to the Gibson Dunn case and have Akiva tell us a little bit about himself and where this case started, and where we are now.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. So I'm a constitutional litigator in New York. And a lot of what I do is challenges to government action, both for industry groups and for private individuals, paid work and pro bono work. And we were contacted by the Roman Catholic Diocese just after Governor Cuomo put into place strict restrictions on houses of worship in early October. So the restrictions just very quickly impose in what was called a red zone, where COVID was at its hottest, a 10-person maximum on any house of worship, even if the church seats 500 people, 1,000 people, with social distancing and masking and sanitizing. There was a special category just for houses of worship that were restricted to 10 people. No other category, no other business, no other activity was restricted like that.
And you could have liquor stores and pet shops and all that open, but not the church. All right, go on.
Liquor store, pet shop, hardware store, grocery store, which, of course you need a grocery store and a hardware store, but you could have hundreds of people congregating in the Target or the Staples for as long as they want. And here, you had a 10-person maximum, and what was called an orange zone, it was a slightly less restricted 25-person maximum, but there were no restrictions on any secular business entities, any businesses at all. So in the orange zone, 25 people in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a temple, and anywhere else there's no fixed capacity restrictions. So we brought a lawsuit. We actually got hired and filed our complaint 48 hours later, which was an amazing stretch. But it didn't end there. We filed for a temporary restraining order, which is kind of an emergency restraint on the restrictions. We had a hearing the next day. We ended up having a full evidentiary hearing the next week with witnesses. We put on witnesses from the church, including Commissioner Esposito, who is a former chair of the New York Emergency Management, and a former police chief who was leading the church's COVID response team and putting into place protocols to make sure when the churches opened that they were doing it safely with all the necessary precautions. And even though they had done all that, and they actually had closed ahead of when the government told them to close at the beginning of the pandemic, they had opened more slowly than the government had even allowed when the pandemic went on, and they had imposed all these restrictions and requirements and protocols that the government wasn't even requiring. Still, the state came in and said, yeah, but you're capped at 10 people, effectively a closure. So, we lost at the lower court. We went up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals, and lost an emergency motion there 2-1. So we had a dissent.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a close call there, right?
Right. So we thought that, the court and the judges, the 3-judge panel, understood the arguments and were receptive. But I think basically felt like because the Supreme Court had earlier in the pandemic, in this case called South Bay, signed off on or refused to enjoin restrictions on churches in California, that it was not, the panel, they said with our hands are tied, the Supreme Court said that they're not going to step in, and so we can't step into. And we said it's a different case, much more severe restrictions. It's later in the pandemic, maybe in May and April, nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody knew how to fight it. Nobody knew how COVID even spread. You didn't even know if it was by touch, by aerosol, how long it took, and all that stuff. So, the courts were deferential to the government. Now we're in October, we're 8 months in. The pandemic was going to go on indefinitely, and we can't have the Constitution basically, put in a drawer and locked away for the indefinite duration of the pandemic. So the court, was taken by that, but I think felt they their hands were tied. One judge dissented and had a very strong, good opinion, adopting our arguments, which is always very helpful when you're about to go up to the Supreme Court, because they see, oh, look, a circuit court judge, which is a respected judge, has seen it your way. It must be a difficult issue. And then we applied to the Supreme Court. This was, 2-3 weeks ago, and we put in what's called an emergency application to the court where you tell the court the case is still ongoing at the lower court levels, but because the stakes are so high and the harm is so severe and immediate, here the constitutional harm from the violation of the First Amendment rights of the churches and their parishioners, and there was a parallel case involving synagogue, that we want the court to step in now. I mean, it's a very unusual request, and even more unusually granted, because the Supreme Court is usually a court of last resort. It's usually, after you've gone through all the processes in the lower courts, then you ask them for permission basically to be heard, and they take 70 cases a year. And so we were coming in and saying, we filed our complaint 5 weeks ago. It's still working its way through the lower courts, but this is such a significant issue that we need you to step in now. And the pitch really, in addition to how significant the issues were, the harm was, and the steps that the churches had taken on their own to be ahead of the curve, the pitch was, look, the lower courts are all deferring, kind of giving a blank check, carte blanche to state governments, no matter what they do. And basically, as long as the state government anywhere in this country says pandemic, suddenly the courts are, say, well, we can't do anything about it, no oversight, no review, we defer completely. And we said that's a dangerous situation that we're in now. If you just wait for this case to proceed and you don't step in now, there have been over 100 cases that had cited that South Bay precedent in every sphere, not just in religion, in free speech, in due process cases, in every kind of legal challenge that you could have, where people had said my constitutional rights are being violated by the state and the local government, and they had said, well, pandemic, and the court had said, okay, well, the Supreme Court has said that basically we're not going to step in, and so we're going to defer. And so we said, you can't let this go on any longer.
Did you raise the holidays coming up, Christmas and
we did
the Jewish holidays?
We did, in the sense, we actually had raised sort of on a weekly basis the fact that, on Saturday was, Shabbat, and then on Sunday was Catholic Mass. And so that was very helpful for pushing the case along quickly, I have to say, because, when we filed the case on a Thursday, we said to the district court judge, we need to be heard tomorrow because, there's going to be services on the weekend and we want an injunction before then. He denied it, but then we went up to the Second Circuit. We made a similar pitch, and to the Supreme Court, a similar pitch. And the Supreme Court, in its decision, did reference Christmas coming up and holidays coming up. So I think that they were, they very much had that in mind. So, very dramatically, as probably most of the listeners had heard, we put in our application late one week, and it was fully briefed, and we were sort of waiting for a decision. Interestingly, and as what ended up being an important side note, the same day that the state put its response in saying that there's no need to intervene, they also took all of the churches and the houses of worship that were at issue, our clients, out of the red and orange zones. And we thought the timing was pretty curious, because at the same press conference, the governor is saying COVID is spiking and, we're going to have to impose strict measures. But coincidentally, just in the areas where your churches are and where you're asking the Supreme Court to intervene, there's no more red and orange zones. There's no need for the Supreme Court to do anything. So, I
think that hurt Cuomo very, very much, because it was very obvious, they were trying to snuff you out in the Supreme Court. And I'm sure the court saw that. And then afterwards, Governor Cuomo made a statement. He said, I think to the effect, I don't care what the court said.
Right.
Isn't that what he said?
He basically, it's irrelevant. It's a political court. And,
yes, that was his word.
That's, sort of a surprising, boldness from a governor when the highest court in the land has just struck what something he did down as unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment.
I have to tell you, and I'm sure my other guests will agree, you are smiling ear to ear. Do you guys see this? Usually lawyers aren't. So, I'm happy because I'm the good health lawyer, but your smile, your energy, even through the camera, we love you and bless you. And what is so significant for me is I've been for 20 years fighting for religious exemption rights. I've actually sued the Archdiocese in a case a long, long time ago with a Catholic school that had turned down an exemption. So, my mother got very mad. I sued the church, but I was polite about it. And, and now to see the church take such, and the synagogues take such an aggressive position, and to have the Supreme Court actually, I don't even know, has the Supreme Court ever done that before, granted a preliminary injunction?
They've done that before, but they've never done it in a public health situation, a situation where the government is claiming, a public health reason for the regulation. And so, and as I said, they'd already a couple times turned them away for churches in this pandemic. And there hasn't, a pandemic thankfully only happens once a century, so there hadn't been much of an opportunity for a while for it to happen. But I think it was, it's considered, very.
That's really good. I want to read an article about your case. It says Roman Catholic diocese marks a sea change in the court's approach to religious objectors, and it is an early sign of the significance of the late liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's substitution with Judge Barrett. So I just want to ask you two questions, and then we're going to move on. Do you think Judge Barrett, she is in charge of the Second Circuit? I mean, I know we don't know what goes on behind or under the robes, but do you think that mattered? And what is next in your case? That's what I'd like to know.
Sure. So Justice Breyer was actually the acting justice for our application. Because Justice Ginsburg had just passed away and they hadn't yet reassigned the circuits. So Justice Breyer was the acting justice. But in these kind of applications, when you have a serious application, the one judge basically always will refer it to the whole court. Technically they can just deny it or grant it on their own, but that's kind of considered bad form. So that's what happened here. Justice Breyer saw, I guess, to recognize that it was significant enough to refer it to the whole court. But your question about what the role of Justice Barrett is still, on point. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. And I think a misunderstanding, in my view, about what happened here, because there's been some commentary that basically this is just kind of like what the governor said. This is just a political decision. It was 5-4 one way before Justice Barrett. Now you have a new justice and it's 5-4 the other way. Look, the Supreme Court, so all it does is, you could guess the outcome. But the reality is that, number one, Justice Roberts, although he voted against us here because of that whole thing about the governor saying that the zones don't apply anymore, said in his dissenting opinion that these restrictions are extreme and severe and may very well violate the First Amendment. And he distinguished his earlier decisions and that earlier case, that South Bay case. So you really had 6 judges here. It was really 6-3 on the core constitutional question, whether these restrictions violate the First Amendment or not. And that's a significant number. And that shows that Justice Barrett wasn't the determiner in that sense. And I think more broadly, it's a kind of facile understanding of what the real and significant, deep, thoughtful work the justices do. I mean, we had 5 justices that were willing to grant our application, but a different case with different facts, different restrictions very well could have and probably would have come out a different way. It was because these restrictions of 10 people, which is effectively a closure order on churches, just on houses of worship when no secular entities have a similar restriction, are totally unprecedented. No other state had restrictions this severe. And the churches and the houses of worship had these, especially for the Roman Catholic Diocese, we had an evidentiary hearing with witnesses that testified under oath that there's been no COVID spread in any of the diocese churches, that they had put in place all the social distancing and masking and sanitizing requirements. And I think that's really what moved the court to say it doesn't make sense to have the most severe restrictions, in the country that are completely untethered to the number of people that can actually fit in a church, or to any practices that are going on, or to any health risk or significant COVID spread, and that's what moved the court. It wasn't that it was a new justice. It was that it was a different facts, different law, and a different situation.
Oh, it was a great case. I was watching every move, as I mentioned before we went live. I was emailing your partner, little tidbits or things that I was seeing, hoping and praying, and we were all praying. I know we were going to wrap up here, so I think you have another brief to write or something, but what is the next step, if you could
Sure.
just tell us?
Quickly tell you, yeah, sure. So we are back at the Second Circuit, the Court of Appeals, for an argument on the 18th. The Supreme Court, enjoined these restrictions until we get a decision from the Second Circuit, and then somebody applies to the Supreme Court for a cert for them to take the case, and the court decides whether to take the case or not, kind of at the conclusion. So the restrictions are enjoined now. The government actually, after initially saying that the injunction was only for our clients and didn't apply across the state, in a filing in another case recently called Seuss, said that they are not going to be enforcing the restrictions anywhere in the state because of the Supreme Court's injunction, which we thought was this kind of natural implication of the order. I mean, I don't know how you could say anything else. But anyway, at this point in time, and if any red and orange zones in the state are still, they still are under all of the generally applicable rules, of course, which include percentage capacity restrictions in certain cases, 25% of total capacity or 50% or whatever, but they are no longer under those strict and fixed 10 and 25% caps. And I would just conclude by saying that our client was, my client, the Roman Catholic Diocese, has been proud to be a leader in both this legal challenge and defending the constitutional rights of everyone in the state and the country, but also in doing it right as far as a religious organization that is ahead of the curve with safety measures, that's taking the pandemic seriously, that's putting in place all the safety requirements voluntarily, and that when you have houses of worship and really anyone, citizens doing that, then there's no need, and it gives us a much stronger constitutional argument when there is a clash with the government. And so, they certainly intend, despite this ruling, or it's consistent with this ruling, to continue to put safety first, but that has to be in the context of the Constitution, and that the government should be respectful, especially when citizens are doing everything right, not to impose draconian restrictions that the Constitution forbids.
Bravo, counselor. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, please tell Randy that we were absolutely praying for you. And, I can't even describe it. It was really phenomenal. And, I'm here if you need me. But we appreciate you coming on. And for the second part of the show, we're going to be talking about medical. And I think you mentioned you have a brief to write or something. Yeah. So I will be in touch, and God bless you. I know that God had his hand in this. I'm sure of it. And that's and you're a brilliant lawyer. So anyway, everybody, thanks to Akiva Shapiro, a counselor with Gibson and Dunn, a big New York City civil rights firm. And we really appreciate you being on the Good Health Lawyer. So thanks a lot.
It was my pleasure. Thank you again.
Take care. All right, super. Thanks. All right, everybody. You're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM. I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer. We're streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the usual. Please share the link and start watch parties, because everybody we know is being shadow banned and censored, except for us, because we are very careful. And anything that you hear on this show is not to be construed as legal or medical advice. It's being provided for informational purposes only. And the show is sponsored by my firm, Patricia Finn Attorney, PC. We're located outside of New York City, here in Rockland County. And for about 2 decades, I've been very involved intimately with vaccine injury and exemption cases. Anybody interested in learning about me can certainly go to my website, patriciafinnattorney.com. All right, now with that all said, let's talk about what's going on with our lovely doctors. We have Dr. Sutton and Dr. Thomas, and of course, the wonderful director of, and you are director, right, Bernadette, of Informed Choice Washington?
Yeah, public policy director. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she's very smart, I might add, too. That's why I like her on the show. Me, I'm a scrapper, I'm in the courtroom fighting everybody all the time. And if it wasn't for the doctors and the scientists and the analysts and the parents behind me, I'm not sure that, we would have had the successes, and we've had a couple of successes. I don't know if you knew, last year, I proved there was no measles epidemic in New York State. But you never heard that, right? You would think that never happened, but we did do that, and we're working on other stuff. But Dr. Paul, let me start with you. I know that you've had kind of an interesting week and there's a lot going on. So why don't you tell everybody who you are and what's up, and the rest of us, including Dr. Sutton, will be asking you questions, and we're here to help in any way we can.
Well, thanks, Patty, for having me on your show. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm a board certified pediatrician. I went to Dartmouth Medical School 35 years ago. I've been in private practice for the last 20 some years, my own practice for the last 13 years. My practice is in Portland, Oregon. And just for getting to the issue at hand, I'll skip a lot of my bio, but I started my practice in 2008 because I was noticing our children were not doing very well. In fact, specifically for 4 years in a row, 2004, 5, 6, and 7, I watched a healthy 1-year-old in my practice regress into severe autism by age 2. Total loss of language, total loss of connectedness, the spinning and slapping your head and just in a lot of distress. And I was already tuning in to asking myself and really researching the why of all this. So our kids are not doing well today. Most in America are aware of this. Those of you who are my age and older, I'm in my 60s. I mean, when we were growing up, there simply were not any children anywhere with severe autism, with severe ADHD, with almost any chronic condition. It just wasn't around. And if you're a new doctor today, you probably think what you're seeing is normal. And this is the disconnect. It's not normal to have every other child graduating from high school with a chronic medication or with a list of chronic diagnoses. So the why of it is really what we're trying to figure out, right? And when I started my practice, I left my old group practice of pediatrics, having become aware that most likely what we do as physicians can cause harm. It's called iatrogenic. I was taught this in medical school. I don't know if they still teach this anymore, but we need to be aware of what we do as physicians to make sure that what we are doing is not causing harm. Well, I started asking the question of myself, because what was I doing, really actually doing as a pediatrician? Well, I was vaccinating, and I was trained to believe that that was the most important thing I could do for a public health, for the children in my care. This is what we do. And to this day, most pediatricians believe that to their core. They're not bad people. I went into pediatrics because I thought, well, first of all, I saw these were the coolest people. They have good hearts. They love kids. They love family. They're family oriented. I'm thinking that's the kind of person I want to be. And so I just want to clarify that. You're not a bad person if you don't understand what's going on, but I would beg of you to start asking the question and really deep dive into the why you're seeing what you're seeing. So what we've been calling for, those of us who became aware that vaccines, toxins in general, but vaccines in specifics might be part of the problem, we've been calling for data. What we have needed is data. Well, I published an article. It's called The Relative Incidence of Office Visits and Cumulative Rates of Bill Diagnoses Along the Axis of Vaccination. That's a mouthful, but basically what we did was for every baby born into my practice over the last 10 and a half years, we did a data dive, pulled out all the babies born into the practice, and there were 2,700 and some who were partially vaccinated and 561 who were not vaccinated. Now that's a lot of unvaccinated kids, but it's not the majority. People say, oh, Dr. Paul's anti-vax. No, the proof is in my data. Most of my patients at least get some vaccines. But to get to what we found, Dr. James Lyons Wheeler helped me with the statistical analysis of this data. He and I were both blinded. This data was de-identified. So when we're looking at it, we have no idea what we're going to find. I'll tell you a little story that was just kind of interesting about this whole process. The medical board's been after me for the last 3 years, basically since I wrote my book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, and published that in 2016. That was like a, hello, here I am, why don't you come after me? Some people, my mom says, did you have to write that book? You know, do you have to put a target on yourself? Anyway,
Yes,
sure enough.
yes, you did.
Yes, it needed to be written. Now that is not an anti-vaccine book, by the way. In fact, as I was publishing, my co-author and I, Jennifer Margulis, a great scientific researcher, and I were looking at this, we're going, you know, this isn't right. We don't have it right. It's called vaccine friendly, thinking that it's way more friendly than the CDC schedule to a developing brain and to a child. But I can tell you today, based on the data I'm about to share with you, it's not friendly enough, okay? So the data we're gonna look at that's published in my practice is just the children born into my practice, not the 15,000 kids I've had in my care. This is just those 3,000 and some who are actually born into the practice. I did this intentionally because what's happened in my career over the last 10, 12 years is that more and more children are leaving other pediatric practices, either being kicked out because they won't follow the CDC schedule, or they have a vaccine injured child and their pediatrician is still trying to force vaccines on their family and they're going, I can't do this. And they find me because they know I honor informed consent. Now, this is what I'm passionate about, is informed consent. Informed consent should be the law of the land everywhere when it comes to any medical procedure that is elective. In other words, it's not an emergency. And we do this for surgeries, but somehow we aren't doing this for vaccines. Here's how it works in my office. Every single well visit, child comes in with their parents. We tell them, here's what the CDC says you should do. Why don't we talk about it? Do you have any questions? And we go over the benefits, the risks, and the alternatives. And with informed consent, one of the alternatives is not giving the vaccine. So out of these 3,700 some patients, 561 chose no thank you, I don't want any. Now, I can assure you most of those came to my practice already knowing they didn't want any vaccines. I'm sitting on this unique situation in Portland where almost all my peers are kicking these patients out and sometimes sending them to me. There's a whole financial piece that will come later. I'm going to publish a paper on that. You know, I lose over $1 million a year just for the admin fee that's not charged because I'm not doing the vaccine. And
Wow,
so
really, Doc? That's unbelievable.
it's a lot of money. So there is a financial incentive to vaccinate. And I used to deny it, to tell you the truth. Somebody would ask me, oh, you pediatricians, you're just vaccinating for the money. I go, no, we're not. We don't make any money. And it's true, the markup is minuscule, but the admin fee compensation from the pharmaceutical companies has gone up and up and up over the years to now where it's just a crazy a lot of money. So there really is an incentive and a very big disincentive to keep patients who are not vaccinating. Anyway, let me jump to the data. I published this study, Jack Lyons Wheeler and I published this study a week ago. And what we basically showed, I don't know if this shows on the TV for you, but this is a graph. And you'll see in orange, those are the more vaccinated children, and the blue is the unvaccinated. Along the bottom axis, that's 10 years. And for every condition that we looked at, pretty much almost every condition, not every, most conditions, if the more vaccines you had, the more health problems you had. And we're talking asthma, allergic rhinitis, breathing problems, behavioral problems, ADD, ADHD, respiratory problems, otitis media, ear pain, eye infections, dermatitis, eczema, anemia, almost anything we looked at. So that's like boom, what the heck? This is crazy. This data set, we pulled this data. What I did was I was having so many board complaints that it was challenging that, what I'm doing is unethical. So I hired an independent researcher to come in and just do a deep data dive, pull all the data from my practice. Let's look at it. So that's what was done, de-identified, sent to Jack Lyons Wheeler, and then we massaged and we looked at it to see what are we finding. And I'll tell you an interesting story. This doctor was so thorough and just a science nerd. First day he comes, he says, Paul, I don't know if we're going to find what you think we're going to find, but I'm going to look. I said, great, look. Now I'm seeing in my practice, family after family comes in with typically 1 or 2 vaccine damaged kids, sometimes severely autistic or other chronic health problems, and their unvaccinated siblings are healthy. And I keep seeing that pattern. I'm going, this is interesting. I'm pretty sure you're going to find that the unvaccinated are doing a lot better. But honestly, we hadn't looked. That's why this data is so powerful. Well, this doctor, after the very first day, is going, Paul, this is ridiculous. This data just jumps out at you. And he was like that the whole week. He was like a kid in a candy store. He could not believe how powerful the data was. I'm going, okay, right? I just had a gut feeling. I didn't have the data. So everybody's been asking for the data. Show us the data. It's now published, and that's the study I'm talking about. I'm sure you can give a link to your viewers, but within less than a week, then the next shoe drops. I get a call on Friday morning from my attorney for the board, and he says he just got a call from Warren Foote, the head prosecutor in Oregon, that they had an emergency meeting and my license had been pulled. So that was the sort of boom. And I'm not personally aware of anybody pulling a license.
Let me just ask a question. You published when?
So it was published, let's see, today is Monday. So it was published on a Sunday.
And then when did they call you to suspend you?
The following Friday, so less than a week. Yeah, so in less than a week, they'd had an emergency meeting and suspended my license. Now, there's a whole document of their accusations, and I can tell you I've gone through them carefully myself. I know most of the patients from the stories they're telling, although I haven't actually pulled the charts because they haven't actually given me those details yet. We're going to get those details, but not a one of their accusations is true or accurate. So it's all stories that are just made up, honestly. And normal due process should be you go to a hearing and you talk about what they're alleging, which, I would be I'm pretty sure it will be easy to show that they're misguided. But in this case, you're guilty until proven otherwise.
Doc, that is just unbelievable. I can't even, I'm so sorry that it happened to you, but I'm glad that you're strong and you're going to fight back. I mean, we absolutely needed that data. We featured your data last week last week on the show. And I'm very good friends with Dr. Jack, and he's been on the show many, many times. And he kept talking about the data, and now here it is, we have it. And unfortunately, now you've got this problem, but everybody loves you, and we're going to support you. And I'm trying to, do you have a link you could add to the data and then put your you have a GoFundMe page ready, right?
So I have a page, I'm calling it Freedom to Choose. And the link to that page is FTC for Freedom to Choose .dp for Dr. Paul approved.com. So ftcdpapproved.com. And that will take you to the page. It'll give you a brief overview of the fights I'm in. I'm actually in 3 separate battles all at the same time. I had 2 major insurance companies drop me this past couple weeks as well. And one is the Providence Health Plan, the largest health plan in Oregon. And that was a bit of a surprise, honestly, although I can tell you what I think's going on actually with most hospitals, and in fact with most doctors and insurance companies. They have somehow been tricked into thinking that how well a person is vaccinated reflects on the quality of the doctor or the hospital. So for example, in the hospital, a quality measure would be how many of your newborns got the hepatitis B vaccine? How many of your newborns got the vitamin K shot? Now, what we really need is, let's look at actual health outcomes, not how well can you follow a protocol? Because unfortunately, CDC recommendations or guidelines are just that. They're recommendations or guidelines. They do not practice medicine. And as my paper now shows, the more vaccinated you are, probably, not probably in the case of my data, but I'm going to say probably in the case of anybody's data, the worse off you are. I mean, the data is speaking loud and clear at a very high level of significance.
I mean, I can tell you as an attorney for the 20 years I've been practicing, I have had more heartbreaking stories than I could share. They're just unbelievable. You know, the mom is like, oh, the baby didn't do so well with the first shot. And, you know, the doctor kept pressuring me, and then I got more. And then all of a sudden the baby couldn't talk. And, you know, and I see patterns in families, like it's generally the older kids that are vaccine injured, and then the parents stop. And then, as you mentioned, the other kids are healthy. You know, and I'm going to turn to Dr. Sutton. I know she had questions for Dr. Paul. So what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much. Well, the first thought is that America works. And we're seeing that with Akiva's story and with Paul's incredible ability to carry this on his own shoulders and do science. And science should work, but it hasn't worked easily from the usual places like the big organizations. It's up to the individual doctors to carry it, and that's what he's done. So I just have enormous gratitude and admiration for hearing this whole story told now. It's wonderful. And I think that we have a really good future ahead if we can have good attorneys and strong doctors working together to protect families' rights so that those younger children at least can be protected from the things that families have learned from following the protocols for their older children. And I guess one question I'd have for Paul is, what do you think the best role is for medical boards, given that they seem to be in a pattern of being authoritarian?
Right. So medical boards traditionally, or at least historically, you go back decades, their role was to protect the public from dangerous doctors, right? And these were traditionally substance abusing, you know, alcoholics or drug addicted, child molesters or sexually molesters, doing things to their patients that they, I mean, just egregious, horrible things, right? And absolutely, we need some mechanism to make sure that that's not going on. Right. But I've seen over the last decade or 2 decades, a real shift and a politicization of the medical boards to where they are now the guardians of the status quo. And when I say status quo, I'm talking about those things that are important for financial interests. It's not even, you know, they always live by this verbiage of standard of care, right? So this is what doctors are held to by medical boards. You are held to the standard of care. And typically that means it's a local thing. For me, it might be in Oregon, or they might even narrow it down to the greater Portland area, for example. What is the standard of care in this case with regards to vaccination? Well, if I was the only doctor who was offering informed consent, and absolutely every other doctor was following the CDC exactly as it's written, that would become the standard of care. You know, if I'm the single person out there, but that's totally not the case. There are plenty of doctors who are still ethical enough to do informed consent. There are plenty of doctors who are allowing their patients to follow their legal right in Oregon to choose how they vaccinate their children. So that's where their whole case in my situation sort of falls apart, honestly. But the medical boards have definitely morphed into something where, you know, if you have a governor who wants to push the vaccine mandate agenda, then they're going to go after the doctors who are getting in the way of that mandate. And I might be considered such a doctor just because I'm honoring informed consent. That still is a threat to a system that wants one size fits all.
You know, last year in New York, there was another case, and this little guy, severely disabled, his doctor gave him a medical exemption in the school, turned it down. We sued, and the school and the state, the school said, we're doing what the state told us. And the state said, no, we're doing what the school told us. And I raised my hand and I said, let's do what the doctor said, because the doctor is the one that knows. The doctor knows the child. And in this particular case, the doctor is vaccinating all the other kids in the family. But this one boy in the family, extremely autistic, and very, very sensitive, they wouldn't. There was another law passed in New York State where the health department, it was a regulation where the health department defines for the doctor what is medically detrimental for an exemption. And, you know, we challenged that and won. And now the state is appealing that. But my argument is, how could the state possibly step in and try to override, overrule, or reinterpret the treating physician? It's to me absolutely crazy. And I think, Dr. Sutton, what you were saying about the lawyers, you know, that is our argument, but you know, we're strapped too. You know, Dr. Paul's not the only one that's had trouble. And it has a lot of financial repercussions. You know, I mean, I live in a fairly affluent place in New York, and, you know, very rich doctors and lawyers, and we're certainly not one of them. And the practice has been, I mean, while personally rewarding, and I believe, you know, my karma is good from it, as for financially or professionally, it's been horrible. And I hope that doesn't happen to you. I mean, everybody's rallying around you. Bernadette, what do you think? How do you think we can get involved here and help Dr. Paul?
Well, definitely, you know, go fund what you can and share that funding link. I did drop it in the Facebook comments there. To go find that. Write to the Oregon Medical Board, express your opinion that you believe in personalized medication and informed consent. It's my opinion that the Oregon Medical Board is the one at total wrong, because they are attempting to push population guidelines on individual patients. And that's an absolutely violation of medical ethics. You cannot, every child does not qualify and is not suitable for the full vaccine schedule. And we do have, you know, freedom rights in this country and in the state of Oregon. So for them to even bring this up, I'm wanting to turn the tables on these people. It's just really appalling that they would want to cause harm to children who are genetically, environmentally, and health-wise not able to handle the full schedule. And if Dr. Paul were to do what he wanted them to do, he would have to intentionally harm children to comply with what, you know, they say he should do, like every child should be 100%. But he's absolutely right too, that what's going on is we have this ridiculous top-down system, and the Medicare and coming from the CDC, there are guidelines, or not guidelines, I forget the word that he said, that if you know, in order to prove you're doing well by your kids, you show how many vaccines they've got. And vaccination does not equal health. You know, there's no health in that needle. It might temporarily prevent you from getting an infection, but at what cost? It does not improve your overall health. It's not a vitamin they're injecting here, you know, it's something different. But this top-down medicine, the whole system needs to be broken open. And I'm so glad that Dr. Paul feels set free, and we're with him. We're going to turn the tide here. We're going to go to nature first, drugs last, and have a real health revolution. And Dr. Paul's leading the way. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Yes, thank you. You're really wonderful.
I want to thank you
go on.
me on. This FTCDPapproved.com site, think of this as our war chest, folks. If we take it to them, attorneys, well, I'm talking to an attorney who's on this show, and it's expensive to do litigation. And if we're going to go after everybody, I'm fighting 3 wars on the same front. And I want to actually, these folks, this board, what they're doing is outright dangerous. So
Yes.
right in the middle of a COVID pandemic and an addiction pandemic, I'm also an addiction specialist, and I have addiction patients I take care of who are on buprenorphine treatment. They're abandoned instantly, cut off by the board. And if they relapse, they're going to die. The streets are full of tainted heroin with fentanyl, and most of the pills are tainted. And I'm putting them on notice that you are responsible for those deaths. This is patient abandonment and is absolutely illegal. The board is not there to practice medicine, and there's no emergency. So every single case they put out in my particular situation is completely wrong. Their information's wrong or just cooked up.
That's really wild. And you know what? You're right. There is no emergency. I mean, look, I'm not giving medical or religious or whatever advice. I'm just, talking generally like we're at the coffee table. But do we really have a COVID emergency? It's a virus that is 99.7% survivable. There's prophylactic treatments out there. There's no guarantee that this vaccine will work, and slowing the spread of COVID, as opposed to, allowing it to develop community immunity, could end up making this far worse. And Dr. Fauci, every other day, he's changing his mind about what we should be doing. And quite frankly, it's up to the individual. If we have informed choice, then that would end a lot of this. I really believe the carrot at the end of the stick here is a syringe, a diseased, toxic-filled syringe. And if we were to remove that, what would the markets do, right? What would the pharma companies do? So, that's my goal, informed consent, and I'm here to help you. So anyway, we only have a few more minutes, but Dr. Sutton, I'd like to bring you both back, actually, and maybe we can talk some more. But why don't each of you give a summary where you can be contacted? Again, Dr. Paul, please repeat your funding page, and I'm going to tell you mine. It's makeamericaskidshealthyagain.com. And we have a lot of pro bono cases going. We are absolutely looking, for donors and people that help fund this work. And my goal is to demonstrate there is no deadly emergency and that you're fine. And God loves you, and it'll all be cool. That's the good health lawyer's word. What do you have to say, Dr. Paul?
Let me just remind you that it takes a healthy immune system to be healthy. That's it. So do everything in your power to have a healthy immune system. And I can assure you a vaccine isn't going to do that. It's going to actually hurt your ability to fight other infections. So that's the topic of another whole discussion. We have important work to do to continue to battle the powers that would like to shut down the truth. The people who are unvaccinated, if that's you and you're watching, you are the most important person on earth because they want to eliminate you. If we can eliminate the control group of the unvaccinated people, we'll never know what's going on. So even the COVID vaccine that's coming, let's say you've had no other vaccine, but you succumb to the pressure to get the COVID vaccine, you are forevermore going to suffer the consequences of having allowed, in the case of the COVID vaccine, messenger RNA attached to your DNA that'll then cause your body to make spike proteins forevermore, and your body will chronically be trying to fight an infection that's not even real. We call that autoimmunity times the X factor. And you will no longer be a healthy person in the control group. So go to ftc.dpapproved.com, join the fight. My other website, if you just want to sign up for newsletters and follow what I'm doing, is drpaulapproved.com. Thanks for your time.
That's great. And you know what? We'll bring you back to get updates on the funding and anything you want to say. We hit New York City area, and the media is concentrated here. And although, these types of shows are not happy with the sponsors, I know they are hearing us, so that's really good. Dr. Sutton, I'll give you a few words here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to hear this exchange and the good news coming from Mr. Shapiro as well. My website is www.raphaelmedicine.com. So I wish everybody the very best in their individual efforts at this very good work that's been undertaken.
Hear, hear. And I'll give you the last word there, Bernadette.
Oh, right. I'm thankful for everybody here. We have an amazing community that's growing exponentially every single day. The silver lining of this COVID chaos is we're finding each other and we're standing up. Stand up, be free, have a great holiday, and just live healthy.
And that's it for today's show. I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer. You're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM. Follow us, donate, and be cool. We'll see you next week. I'm ready. Okay, I'm going to kill the live here. And